Okay, so we've seen that urgency is when you do something, and importance is how long you spend on those tasks. So we get 4 combinations of urgency and importance. Some tasks are both, some are neither, some are one or the other. So let's have a look at what we've got in these 4 boxes. Now, box number 1, this is the tasks that are both important and urgent. And I would call this the crisis box. These are tasks that you have to do straight away because they're urgent, and you have to spend plenty of time on them because they're important. Something like your house being on fire would definitely be a box 1. But, big problem with a customer, anything that's just suddenly cropped up that you've got to rush and deal with is in box 1. Most of us don't spend too much time in box 1, although it does depend on your job. If you work for the casualty department in a hospital, you might be in box 1 nearly all the time. Whereas if you're head of strategic planning, then hopefully you're not going to be in box 1 at all, although I think sometimes they are. So, subject to variations in jobs, most of us don't spend too much time in box 1. And that's good, because box 1, although you're working on something important, you don't want to be doing it at the last minute. It will add stress if you spend too long in box 1. And if you're spending quite a bit of time in box 1 and you've got several tasks all arriving at the same time, that's a real nightmare, because you have to deal with the first one and the second and third ones have to wait, which they can't do because they're urgent. And if they do have to wait, it's going to be a real problem because they're important. So you don't really want to spend more than about 10% of your time in box 1. Much more important to tackle those tasks before they get into box 1. Where are they before box 1? And the answer is they will be in box 3. Things tend to move upwards on my diagram. They tend to move from box 3 up into box 1. They don't move across the diagram, they don't change in importance, but what they do is they change in urgency as they gradually move upwards. So every box 1 task starts out life in box 3. Every problem you have starts out sometimes in somebody else's box 3, by the way. Sometimes it sits in the customer or the boss's box 3, festering until suddenly it becomes a crisis and they give it to you, thanks very much. But they are somewhere. And every crisis you get has a root cause. Maybe the person wasn't trained, or there wasn't a proper system, or whatever. And those are all box 3 things. Setting up systems and training are all in box 3. So if you could tackle them as box 3 tasks before they reach box 1, that would be much better. Box 3, in fact, is the key to everything. Box 3 is where all your results will come from. And the more time you can spend in box 3, the better. And the objective of this whole training course, really, is to get you to be a box 3 person. So if you look at what's in box 3, thinking, planning, getting ahead of the game, learning new things, everything that really matters in box 3. And in fact, anything that you could do that would increase the quality of your life will be in box 3. So exercise in box 3, self-development is in box 3, all those sorts of things are in box 3. In management terms, box 3 also includes things like vision for the future, strategy, planning, developing your people. Those are all things that are important, but not necessarily urgent. You can always put the strategy off till next week. You can put getting fit off till next week. So the thing about box 3 is that it isn't urgent, but it is important. And by the way, because it's not urgent, it means you can put it off. And so procrastination affects box 3 particularly. And that's so unfair, because it means that procrastination only really affects the most important box. And that's why we've got a whole section on procrastination, which you can do later on. Very important to overcome procrastination if you're going to be a box 3 person. I'm going to return later to how can you spend more time in box 3. But just to have a look at the other 2 boxes. There's box 2. Box 2 is urgent but unimportant. And I would call this the hassle box. This is all the phone calls and emails and just all the sort of stuff that's coming in every day. I think most of us spend more than half of our days in box 2. I sometimes call it the hamster wheel box, because this is you just running, just dealing with all the little tasks all day. Do you ever have a day where you work really hard all day, just busy, and then you drive home and you think, where did that day go? I've got nothing to show for it. Another day just gone. And that feeling is where you've spent the whole day in box 2. So you've been busy, you've been doing urgent things, but you know somehow that you haven't done anything important. It's been a maintenance day rather than a progress day. And that's the feeling of having spent all day in box 2. Clearly we've got to do something about that. And in the next section we're going to look at how can you spend less time in box 2. But remember that those tasks are urgent, and that means usually that it's coming from someone else. So you probably will have to do the box 2 tasks, but the question is, how can we do them in minimum time? How can we squeeze them down? And there are 5 strategies that we're going to deal with in the next section on that. Now the final section is box 4. What would be in box 4? Well, quite often this is called the don't do it box. They're not urgent, they're not important, why do them? But I actually think that box 4 divides into 2. Some box 4 activities absolutely are don't do it. An example I quite like is ironing pants. I think we'd probably all agree that's a don't do it task. But I think there's a big part of box 4 that has to be done. And I think ironing shirts, for example, probably does have to be done. Housework has to be done. Filing has to be done. All those sorts of just sort of maintenance-y type things have to be done. They're not important. We'd love to press a magic button and not have to do them. And they're not urgent. You can always put them off for one more day. If you keep putting them off, of course, they become urgent and they move up into box 2 and become hassle. So if your filing's not done or your ironing's not done, then it will move up into box 2. And I think this division in box 4 really can be defined by, if it's not going to get any worse, don't do it. But if it's going to become a hassle, then you will have to do it. And it's better to do it in box 4 before it moves up into box 2 and becomes a hassle. So there definitely is a section in box 4 for things that have to be done. But because they're not urgent, you can plan when you do them. And because they're not important, you should minimise the time you spend. So you should plan them in and spend the minimum time. So something like filing, for example, you could just plan that you'll spend half an hour on Friday and you'll just do it in the minimum time. Or the ironing, plan when you're going to do it and then just bang through it in the minimum time. Have a good system, have a good ironing board, etc. Multitask, maybe do something else while you're ironing, but just get it done in the minimum time. So that's the main bit of box 4. It's either don't do it or it's plan it in, spend the minimum time. So those are the 4 boxes. You've got crisis, you've got planning ahead, you've got the hamster wheel, hassle, do it in the minimum time, and then you've got box 4. We want to spend more time in box 3 because all of our results are going to come from box 3, but the question is, what can you do? And there are only 2 ways that you can get more time for box 3. One of them is work longer hours. Of course, that's only going to get you more time for box 3 at work. It's not going to help you with your total life. And in fact, working longer hours at work is usually a bad idea. There's been lots of research done into people who work long hours at work. And what they always find is that people who work longer hours don't achieve any more than the people who work normal hours. They're just less efficient per hour. And this is because if it becomes a habit that you're going to work longer hours, you pace yourself through the day. You become less efficient through the day as well because you know you've got the evening and maybe the weekend, and you think, well, I'm stuck in this meeting, but it doesn't matter because I've got the weekend. Or people keep interrupting me, but it doesn't really matter because I've got the quiet bit in the evening. So you lose a grip of your day if you work longer hours. So working longer hours is actually not good for you. It doesn't really work. It cuts into your personal life, which you need in order to recharge your batteries. Not a good plan. By the way, there is one exception to this, which is I think it's okay to work longer hours occasionally. And in fact, you have to. If you care about your job, if you've got any loyalty to your company, you will sometimes have to work longer hours, and that's fine. It would be outrageous if you didn't. But what I'm really saying here is you mustn't get into the habit of just working longer hours every night. And it's a very seductive habit because once you're doing it, you can't really get out of it because you've got your inefficient day, and if you then cut off the evening as well, you'd have nothing. So it's very difficult to push all the stuff back out of your day and get the proper work back into it again. So working longer hours is not going to be the answer. Even if it was, the company would just give you more work to fill it. So you're never going to get ahead of the game by working longer hours. So what else can be done if we can't work longer hours? How can we get more time in box 3? And the answer, obviously, is to get it from the other boxes. which box are you going to get the extra time from? Well, clearly if you're wasting loads of time loafing around in box 4, then that would be the first box to hit and do something about. But I think most of us, we don't, I mean these days we don't have a lot of time just wasted in box 4. And you can't really reduce box 1 very much. I mean, wouldn't it be great if you could say, sorry, I can't respond to that crisis of yours because I'm planning today. But that's not really feasible. So in the end, the only thing you can do is to cut box 2. And that's the box we have to reduce. And that's what we're going to look at in the next section.